which is also which was same like lore as Puck, has a donkey's head and a little body, and so this kind of joke to the audience at the time that he puts an ass head on bottom, and we're all laughing because he's an ass, and now he actually is an ass. And the fairy's like, "Oh, aren't you so beautiful?" Because he looks like a puka,
and they like
pukas. Yeah.
How fascinating! I did not know that. I would like to think this one.
Do other cultures have a fairy lore that
I would be willing,
or imps or whatever?
I would be willing to bet serious money that other cultures have white lies, whatever form those white lies take. But I didn't need to have a conversation on that. Do other countries have those? I'm sure they do.
Japan does, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, I was looking in Eastern and Middle Eastern cultures trying to find some influence because the Puck I could trace it back to the same time period where different cultures had the same root word, and the only thing that I was able to find so far was the jinn.
Of course.
Yeah.
Genies.
And the similarities of early lore of the jinn, genie is plural, yeah. No, genie is singular, jinn is plural. I can't remember. But is that they were domestic spirits that were tied to a place, and that you had to keep on their good side, and they did household chores for you and stuff like that. And so I didn't know if that actually is what came over somehow, before our written history, and that's why we have them.
And then, of course, when something is described, like this strategic communication referring to fairies, it can then enter literature. And so you have real fairy stories that aren't a white lie, that aren't covering anything, right? That are just simply really good stories. How I Tricked the Leprechaun, it becomes its own story rather than an excuse for someone getting money. But it might have well begun as an explanation for where I got this loot. Jonathan's having a thought. I can always tell.
I mean, of course, I'm just trying to think of, I'm trying to bring T.S. Eliot into the conversation here.
He does that a lot.
I
we
do.
know Jonathan.
But I'm trying to think of, just in relation to the wasteland, and regardless of how, what our responses here are in regards to fairies, I think that is what Eliot and some of the other modernists are trying to talk about, regardless of how we feel about these white lies, is whatever we shouldn't do is forget about them or lose their traditional ties to the sort of cultural value, and that's in the wasteland. When you hear Eliot talk about the heap of broken images, he's talking about going forward in the wake of World War I, how that has created such a disconnect in sort of relating some of these, what your mother, some of these white lies, or some of these stories that have been passed down, what happens whenever we lose that in our lexicon, or just in our how that changes our day-to-day lives. And so this heap of broken images now, we lose something that informs ourselves and our culture. And so regardless of how, fairies and Santa Claus and things of that nature, it's not whether or not they're real, but what sort of value do they bring and how we associate with one another, how we bring up our children, things of that nature. So,
I didn't bring the quote by John Aubrey here. John Aubrey, after the end of the Civil War, said much the same thing, that the fairies had been scared away by the gunpowder in the Civil War, and that this is a great loss. So fairies there began that were originally used for one form of white lie and communication, came to symbolize a foundational past, which is valuable and the scholarship for that loss. So Aubrey said that in the late 17th century. T.S. Eliot went in the 20th. So interesting. Actually, fairies have always just disappeared. Chaucer talks about how we used to believe in fairies, but we don't believe anymore.
We lost a lot of our magic culture when we gained technology. We know why the fungi grows in a circle now. Fairies didn't have to do that.
Although I know, I see in front of my computer, it was fairies. Maybe we're bringing it back in. What did it? It was the fairies.
Oh, what's funny is just a couple weeks ago, my friend and I were talking about this, and I was talking about all the research that I had done, and it's so silly. Well, it seems silly now in our culture, but I had just filled up my mug of soda, and I set it down, And after it, she was going to have me fill up hers, and she started to pick it up, and it was completely full of soda. And she like dropped it and made this whole mess, and we were laughing about it, and we went back, and there was no soda in my mug. And I had only taken like one sip out of it. And we were laughing because we had been sitting there talking about the fairies and invoking the fairies, and we both, I mean, I know that I filled my soda, and that I set it down, and then a second later she picked up her glasses. I realized, oh, she wants me to fill hers up too, and hers was full, and then mine was empty.
Sunday, I lost my checkbook, couldn't find it. We looked in the back seat, did not look in the back seat of the car. Bill looked, I looked, it wasn't there, and then it was. And then it was.
What? Yeah.
So we now have permission as a group to go out and ascribe to fairies any number of lost things or stolen things.
Where they hide it all.
Where they hide it all.
Okay.
In the 14th century, when Jack Cade took over some land, this is historically speaking, it's the 14th century, he claimed it in the name of the Queen of Fairies and called himself the Queen of Fairies. So he didn't, obviously, he's not a fairy king, but what he was doing is he was saying, I have as much right to this land as the Earl of such and such, because I'm the Queen of the Fairies. I have as much right. So property theft was also, so what the white lie isn't just that I got the loot. Why is that an acceptable lie? That when it's for stolen, is because this underground culture disputed who has a right to the property, right? That in this underground culture, theft was quite possibly acceptable because the way the property was distributed was unfair. And so stealing something was allowable, acceptable, and the white lie is that it's fairies, but actually the truth is that stealing is legitimate activity. I'm glad you got it.
And often stuff that was already taken from them by their landlords.
That's right. That's right.
And possibly the perpetuation of the idea of evil spirits in the forest to keep common man out of the lands owned by the development.
So you couldn't change the entire system.
No.
You could change your situation.
There you
by
go.
using those things.
Local. And so when you see in Shakespeare's plays, when you see fairies, it's usually there's a lower class component. When the Earl of Gloucester and King Lear is about to commit suicide and jump off the cliff, he gives his money to poor Tom, who thinks he's a beggar, really his son, but never mind who he was really. So he says, he refers to it as fairy money. And what that means is he thinks that poor Tom is of that group, of that low group that tends to use this fairies as a form of strategic communication. So if this is very bold that he has a right to it, he doesn't have to say he got it from the name of his suicide. So let's see, it is 5 o'clock. Thoughts? This has been a wonderful read. So glad it's so bright. Yeah. So I'm done. But it's really delightful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When did you get your degree? Oh, that was great.
How's everything going?
Yes, right. So we already did it. So.
I've been studying like Tao and
Oh yeah.
So
Do you know
nice to
Patrick
see you.
Tucker?
I feel like you didn't get your-
I have a book you need to get. It's used in the title sounds really silly. It's called Secrets to Acting Shakespeare,